So here we go, underway at the Magic the Gathering unofficial audiobooks. Welcome in. Book 4, the final chapter of the Artifact Cycle, Bloodlines. What an amazing journey it has been, and I'm glad you are here. Also, we have our first partnership/sponsorship with the creator of customizable Shadowbox cubes, and they are a must-see. Check them out in the link to the show notes, or head to etsy.com/shop/apesincapes. These are tremendous collector's items to add to your showcase, and as we approach gift-giving season, getting something special and personal for that fan in your life, looking at the site now, if you're a fan of old-school video games, maybe like Zelda or Homebound or Doom, maybe you're into anime like Akira or Avatar, or really just about anything that you are a fan of can be customized into a very cool piece to add to your collection. And for those that didn't hear, for the next 5 patrons who cross the $100 mark, we'll be getting an Urza and Mishra special edition piece. The two brothers battling it out at a Friday Night Magic. It is epic. You can see it for yourself on my Twitter. That's Phil in Sendai. And you can join the Patreon with the link in the show notes. Plus, if you're unable to join the Patreon and get the Shadowbox, you can get 10% off just by being a listener to this program. If you use the code word MAGIC at checkout, MAGIC. It was originally going to be Urza, but it has to be 5 letters, so we had to change it to MAGIC. So again, 10% off your order at etsy.com/shop/apesincapes. Go check it out now. I swear you will not be disappointed. It is very cool. Also, with the Patreon, we have a lot of new joiners. Whole new slew of patrons. Ethan, Addict, Paul, Alexander, Callum, Nathaniel, and Laura. Thank you so much for joining up and your support. It means the world to me. Our patron goal for the next few months, another travel goal, heading from Japan to the United States so my daughter can meet her grandparents for the first time. So if that is something that you feel like supporting, in addition to supporting all this great content, I welcome it with open arms. Lastly, don't forget to tell your friends. Share the show. Let me know how you're enjoying things. I'm a big fan of you, the listeners, and I'm glad to be doing this, and I'm glad that you are along for the ride. So thank you so much. All right, I think we are all set. Let's do this. Book 1, The Human Component, 3385 to 3571 AR.
The difference in designs between demon and man is often that razor-thin line which divides the intentions of one from the other. No one has demonstrated that principle to me better than Urza. When forced to descend to the level of one's enemy, that fine blade may be the only path remaining back to sanity. Baron, Mage Master of Tolaria.
Chapter 1. Gatha gazed out of one of the nearby teardrop windows, his arms crossed defiantly over his chest as Baron answered questions for a batch of new students. Smoke-tinted glass stained the outside world a dull gray, physically expressive of Gatha's own darkening mood as Baron continued to make him wait. Rain spattered off the window's upper curve, at times hard and insistent and then fading to a light drizzle. The latest buildings for Urza's new laboratories had been completed just in time. Tolaria's stormy season had begun. "We've been over this before," Master Baron explained in an answer to a question Gatha had ignored. The mage's voice remained patient, though at a glance the senior student noticing a tightening around Baron's hard green eyes, which forewarned a darkening mood. "The magic presents no direct influence on the developing child. It is a procedure used prior to conception to accent the traits which the child already stands to inherit from its natural parent." He was still discussing the Bloodlines project, Urza's controversial plan to develop some kind of master warrior. It was now 6 years into its first generation of subjects. Gatha shrugged aside concern for Baron's argument and began tapping his foot to illustrate his impatience. Like sheep with their shepherd, in Gatha's judgment, the new students flocked around Baron at the front of the workshop. The space had been cleared and cleaned by the senior student in preparation for this orientation class. Except for the half-built gestate cradle pushed into one forward corner, it was the same as every lecture hall in the main academy buildings. Gatha might have found better uses for his time, though a request from Baron was never to be ignored. There was something to be said for any recognition by the academy's chief administrator. The senior student held his silence and his place, occupying himself by studying the latest arrivals to Tolaria. The group was one short of a full dozen. Their eyes burned brightly with interest over the tour of the new labs and the information imparted by the Master Mage. Many of them aspired to be the next Prodigy, of course, the next Teferi or Joyro, or like Gatha himself. At the Island Academy, such visions of personal grandeur were expected, even encouraged, if one owned the talent. A few students fell outside such generality, though. They glanced about, troubled and nervous. Gatha labeled those ones right away as the next set of able hands. They might work on the major projects, even on the legacy itself, but always under the exacting direction of others. Tools in the hands of masters like Baron, Rain, and, one day soon, himself. One such student raised a nervous hand. He was whipcord thin, with hair the color of rhubarb and a nose which battled and defeated the rest of his face for attention.
The plans for these Metathran? We've heard discussed in the hallways and amphitheaters?
His reedy voice grew in strength and confidence as he progressed.
Simulacra given true life through focused mana. Forced development, probably through overlaid patterns, cloned off desired predecessors.
He glanced around, looking for support, found it wanting.
A slave race?
He asked, confidence finally waning and telling in his restless stance. Gutsy, Gatha decided at once, awarding the junior student credit for calling Baron on the morality of Urza's newest plans. Strong opening, near brilliant supposition, but ultimately dumb. The senior student looked back to the window, catching a light reflection of his own face in the tinted glass, and of course, unable to ignore the triangular tattoos decorating his forehead. It was a debatable honor to be given an artificial set of the Keldon triple widow's peaks. The marks were placed on his entire family after his father served as military liaison to a Keldon war host hired to fight for Argiv. He turned his attention back to the group of new students. Gatha looked at the gutsy inquisitor who had engaged Baron. The younger student dwelled too heavily on the methods, not enough on the potential. He would amount to little. Urza Planeswalker supported the plan, and therefore it would happen. It became now, to Gatha's way of thinking, a question of who would lead and so be recognized by the chancellors for promotion to tutor status. Anything else was a waste of the student's time. Baron, however, seemed able to dip forever into a well of patience when it came to the newer students.
Timon, isn't it?
He asked, favoring the student by remembering his name. Gatha shrugged off any concern for competition. The other's scarecrow build guaranteed some measure of easy recall.
We were speaking of the Bloodlines project, dealing with human generations. These Metathran you ask about are, as you said, simulacra, Baron continued. Still, I won't disagree with the idea that we are raising new philosophical issues at the Academy, he said, switching his address to the entire class. You've all had your first classes in Phyrexian physiology and psychology by now, so you have some idea of what we're up against. We'll need the Metathran to fight them, and no, he returned to Timon on a more personal note. They will not be slaves. Gatha, he called out, what is the second criteria of Metathran psychology? Caught in the midst of his personal reflection, Gatha started. A hot flush raced from the back of his neck up over his scalp, a discomfiture which lasted all but 3 seconds. He swallowed away the dryness in his mouth his brief embarrassment had brought. Eyes were upon him now, and he managed to look both contemplative and studious as he turned back to the assemblage. Gatha did not mind an audience. To restrict their mental functions to areas of personal survival and martial ability. He recited verbatim from Urza's text, adding his own dramatic touch to the quotation. With a limited concept of self and society. He traced one finger along his jaw, then smoothed the pleat along the front of his white robes. In effect, they are a type of golem. Nodding his approval of Gatha's conclusions, Baron's steady gaze still conveyed a measure of warning to the senior student that he should pay more attention. Like any artifact, the Metathran will obey its programmed instructions. As with the Weatherlight, they are instruments of our defense.
No one raised another question, though the shuffling gestures of several students, Timon among them, suggested that the issue is not completely answered to their satisfaction. Baron seized upon the opportunity to end the session. With one hand he tugged at the golden mantle to his robes, straightening it, and with the other he waved toward the workshop's door.
That'll be all for today. Return to your regular classes.
They moved toward the door.
Gatha, you will remain, please.
As the students filed out, Gatha caught mixed looks of curiosity admiration and jealousy from the new students. He drew strength from those stares and glares. Such expressions meant that his name was known, and he wanted it. Only Timon offered nothing for him at all, glancing over with a simple expression of frank appraisal, as if he were weighing Gatha's worth by observation alone. Gatha smiled back, tight-lipped and challenging. "What do you think?" Baron asked when the room cleared and Gatha had shut the door. It was a purposefully vague question meant to elicit more than basic information, but also something as to how Gatha himself thought. The student did not mind, confident in his own ability. "A verbose way of saying that the ends justify the means," he said, immediately seizing upon the earlier drama in which he had a part. "Most of them are still trying to untangle the argument." The hints of a smile tugged at the corner of Baron's mouth, though not necessarily one of encouragement or humor. "You think you see more clearly than they do?" No hints of approval or disapproval in his tone. In place of answering, Gatha walked over to the half-completed gestate cradle, one of the new modular designs that Urza had requested. Its sledge-shaped body would be capable of full growth support for the Metathran soldier created within, if the artificers worked out the majority of the design problems, that is. "I've read the Academy histories," he finally answered, circumspect. He reached out to place a hand upon the slick metal casing, noticing a touch of oil to its surface. Being able to touch a thing always made it seem more real. "I've yet to find even one project that has advanced this far along that was not carried through to completion." A polite way of saying that arguments were pointless at this late stage. Baron nodded and then headed over toward the door. He paused, hand on knob. "Coming?" he asked. Gatha quickly fell into step behind the Mage Master. "Your achievements have not gone unnoticed," he said as they walked down a long hall past doors leading off to other workshops. The lab still smelled of new construction, raw wood, and finishing paint. "You have made certain of that. Still, self-promotion aside, you excel in your studies and of magics, and your natural grasp of artifice is impressive as well." He pulled a key from within the folds of his robes and used it to unlock a door at the end of the hall. This new workshop had been modified and outfitted for immediate use. Blue metal file drawers had been mounted into one wall. Metal tables sat in the center of the room with trays of instruments, some obviously magic in nature, but most of pure artifice, arranged on top of it. The room was well lit and spotless, but it was very cold. Their breath clouded in front of them. Gatha shivered involuntarily, one hand clutching at the front of his blue tunic, trying to draw it tighter against his skin. Baron closed the door behind them and locked it. He gave Gatha another frank look of appraisal, eerily reminiscent of Timon's earlier expression. The student bore up under the scrutiny for the first time, feeling a bit awkward. Finally, Baron awarded him with a reluctant nod. "I'm adding to your duties," he said. Moving to the file drawers, the Master Mage threw a catch at one of them, then leaned his weight outward as if pulling it open against great weight. Gatha sucked in a cold breath and held it. Resting in the drawer over a long plate of metal was a blue-skinned humanoid of impressive height and elongated skull. Dark blue glyphs, magical sigils perhaps, decorated the naked body, reminding Gatha of his own tattoos. There was an elegance to the sexless, lean-muscled creature. The Master Mage did not need to tell Gatha that he looked upon his first Metathran. Part of Urza's newest labs were obviously functional. He looked to Baron, found the elder man staring at him levelly. "What do you think?" the mage asked again. What did he think? Gatha recognized immediately that he had achieved the next step in his education here on Tolaria. He was being trusted with a new responsibility, and his next break would come from his own ingenuity and his ability to make things happen. Gatha let out his breath and smiled. "Where do I begin?" Rain bent farther forward, leaning far out over the lens to inspect for flaws. Tall and lithe, she reached nearly the middle of the 4-foot radius device. The muscles along the backs of her legs tightened and quivered, holding her from smashing through the delicate item. Silk bands tied back the wide sleeves of her flowing robes to prevent even their light brush on the lens's surface. Hardly daring to breathe, wary of fogging the area over which she worked, she continued her search. The sapphire tint to the material partly reflected her own image, making detection of the flaw harder than if it had been crystal clear, backed by a deliberate pattern. She studied her own raven black hair, her thin nose, and her long, slender eyebrows in the reflection. There, near the single curl of hair that
Tucked down in front of her ear was a mar in the lens's otherwise perfect reflection. She rotated the special magnifying glass that a student had created for her over into her field of vision. The glass clipped comfortably to her forearm and moved about on a pliant, telescoping arm. It was light enough to almost be ignored and left both of her hands free in case they were needed. She couldn't be sure if Gatha had put a touch of magic into the glass or not, but it cut the glare and allowed her to focus on the most minute object. Now it showed her the lens's flaw in great detail, a large irregularity in the lattice structure. Ruined. She straightened up cautiously, still treating the lens with extreme care. It represented too much work to rate anything less. Karn moved forward, the silver golem's massive frame dwarfing Rain. He had waited quietly against the wall for 3 hours.
The crystal lattice again?
He asked, his voice soft and deep. Rain smiled at him, recognizing his regular attempt at courtesy now that she had disengaged from her study. Yes, Karn. Over 500 student hours, all told, ruined by a microscopic defect. A flawed artifact. She turned her back on it. There's no wishing it to perfection. Place it on the rack, please. Urza will want to inspect it himself, though I know the flaw is too large. A scholar of the artifice at the Academy, Rain normally commanded enough authority on such projects to make her own decisions, but never when it came to Urza. The Planeswalker always double-checked her work when it involved his own projects. With a delicate care belying his great strength, Karn used a large, grooved fork to grasp the lens securely by its edge rather than the plane. He hefted it, pivoted, and slid it carefully in a storage rack next to 2 others that had also failed to meet standards. Rain had already moved on to a new activity. Her private shop always held at least 3 different ongoing projects, not counting students' work that she had to check over in order to gauge and track the progression. The room smelled of oiled leather and metal. Tables appeared cluttered with tools and parts, though in truth, the clutter was actually a complicated but well-ordered system of easy access sorted by probability of use. Most residents of the Academy failed to grasp the concept. A few of her better students had picked up on the system. It was also the one time she believed that she'd impressed Urza Planeswalker. On his one visit after her assignment to a legacy artifact, he had walked in and actually said, "They're nice," in reference to the layout. He never touched one tool, but 4 of his assistants were sent over that day to study the shop design. At a table, Rain puzzled over a new clockwork engine built from Thran metal. The living metal kept growing, binding up joints and gears, if not perfectly balanced for the expansion. She flipped the magnifying glass back into her line of sight, staring through it while working on the smooth, intricate pieces. Behind her, Karn finished moving the lens and then resumed his patient vigil. Baron will be late again, will he not? She paused to correct her own Argivian. Won't he?
I do not know, Mistress Rain.
Rain stopped working and glanced back at the silver man with a slight hitch to his shoulders, surely a learned trait. Karn elaborated.
He did not communicate such to me, but he did seem very involved in studying Gatha's recent accomplishments.
Gatha was one of Baron's best pupils. But as much a curse, that one, she said aloud, a touch of dry humor to her voice. First there was Teferi and Joyra, and now Gatha. Why do the brightest ones always bring with them so much trouble? She glanced back to Karn. What did he do this time? The golem cast his gaze away.
There was an incident at the lab, something to do with enhancing certain traits among the Metathran. Gatha experimented with the eugenics matrix without the permission of Urza or Baron. The facts bore him out, but the result was... The golem paused. Messy.
Rain shook her head, as much over the trouble surrounding Gatha's lack of caution as the problem the engine presented her. Everything rests on the details, she thought in relation to both problems. It would help if she knew what the engine's ultimate purpose was, but Urza had left her in the dark. Part of the legacy, perhaps, or another refinement to the Metathran labs. Rain felt frustrated working like this. It would be more frustrating, she imagined, to be saddled with Baron's problems. Bring me a stool, please, Karn. It'll be another late night. Conversation waned as she worked further into the delicate engine. What more was there to say? They both knew Urza to be a hard taskmaster at times. Baron followed because he believed in Urza and the Walker's vision for defending Dominaria. Rain's vision was more limited to her own work, the creation and maintenance of artifice. In matters of greater scale, she trusted Baron's judgment. If the Master Mage thought his presence elsewhere important enough to remain away, then she could do no less than keep working as well.
The vault sat at the heart of Urza's labs, a domed room of titanic proportions devoted to the creation and full gestation of Metathran warriors. The grand arches that buttressed the lower walls allowed better than 30 feet of head clearance. Enchanted globes set into the walls filled the cavernous room with soft light. Conspicuously missing were the gestate cradles. Baron had ordered Gatha and others to remove the devices before Rain's students were brought in to fit a new lens into one of the mechanisms. The mage doubted that such a precaution was really necessary. Most students knew the labs were already functioning to some degree, but Urza's orders stood. The students worked high above the floor on scaffolding sat next to one large pillar, junior students steadying the platforms or passing up tools as they were called for by their seniors. Voices and the sounds of work echoed around the vault. Rain stood out on the open floor, her hands tucked into the opposing sleeves of her robes, supervising her students with a critical eye that missed nothing. Baron did not approach her yet. An earlier nod and brief smile told him that she knew of his presence. Now he awaited some signal that her attention was no longer required on the work in progress. As he would with any scholar of the academy, Baron allowed her full authority over the area in which she worked. Besides, the Master Mage needed a few extra minutes to muster his courage. Soon the students had finished their task and they sealed the pillar where the lens had been placed. Rain waited while the students disassembled the scaffolding and were beginning to remove tools and equipment from the vault, then turned toward Baron and awarded him with a full, warm smile for his patience. Baron's legs felt weak, but they managed to carry him forward. As always, he was struck by her delicate beauty, porcelain skin, and slender frame, not the usual image of an artificer. "Hello, my dear," she said, reaching out with one hand to accept his embrace. He folded her into a quick hug, for a second oblivious to the nearby students.
"Greetings."
He paused, now a touch self-conscious about the nearby onlookers. Rain sensed more in the undercurrents of his voice. No matter that, he had tried to hide both his distress and nervousness. She frowned lightly, curious. "There is news?" she asked, deliberately trailing off the question to allow him an easy time for response. Nodding, the maid met her searching dark brown eyes.
"Gatha completed the latest tests, and Urza is less than happy with the results."
He took a deep breath, tasting the chill air of the larger chamber.
"All indications point toward 40 generations," he says, in order to develop the heir to the legacy. We're unsure so far how many subjects we can hope to raise in fast-time environments, but the island's shattered time streams might work for us. How Urza's calculating this is anyone's guess.
Rain gave the lightest of shrugs. "Numbers do not lie," she said simply. Baron caught the implication. Numbers do not lie, but Urza might. The Master Mage pushed that disturbing thought from his mind. There's a time and place to have that discussion, but the Planeswalker who founded the Tolarian Academy was not the subject Baron had come to talk about.
"My new quarters in the slow time area are complete," he said without further preamble. "Close enough to complete, anyway, for me to take up residence."
The possibility had been considered years ago, and preparations were made in case a large facility in extreme slow time was necessary. The legacy, especially the Bloodlines project, required an overseer other than Urza, one whose presence was considered more dependable. Drinking of the island's slow time waters, the proverbial fountain of youth, arrested aging, but 40 generations demanded more extreme measures. The island's temporal anomalies offered the solution. Some of the best and brightest would move into slow time areas. Those who would coordinate the various projects and keep the legacy focused over the centuries. Baron would be the first among them. They would be in slow time for 1,200 years, relative to the rest of Dominaria, but only 30 or so subjective to the person.
"I've already ordered my assistants to begin moving my offices and labs," he finished weakly.
Rain stepped back, arms folding protectively across her body. "So soon?" she said, hugging herself tightly. She looked up, apparently ready to say something, but then shook her head. "This is goodbye, then?" she asked calmly.
"That depends on you."
It bothered him, the idea of living out such an extended and isolated life in slow time. It bothered him more when he considered that this move could take him away from Rain forever. It was that thought, more than anything, that had driven him forward on this course.
"You could come with me."
Was that a flash of joy in her eyes? Baron couldn't be sure.
I could,
she said, part question, part statement.
Yes, he said, verbally stumbling forward. I would like you... I'm asking you to join me. I'm asking you to marry me.
Now Baron felt the cold sweat standing out on his forehead. Rain stared back as if not comprehending what he had just asked of her. He felt several long heartbeats marking the seconds. There's nothing else for it then? Rain said, smiling beautifully. Of course I will.
Yes?
Baron asked, marveling at Rain's acceptance. He flushed suddenly warm and pleasant shock, then smiled and gathered Rain in for another hug. They embraced each other heavily, and Baron counted himself fortunate to have found such a person to share his life. It was a good omen, perhaps certainly good fortune, which Baron was not about to dismiss for all of his other concerns. He felt immortal in a way that a slow time life could never provide.